Okay, Mirziyoyev's been effectively in power for about 8 weeks. He has moved, I'm starting out with the softer around the edges here. He's been in power for about 8 weeks, and he's moved so fast on regional politics and reaching out to Uzbekistan's neighbors. We've seen more activity just in these 8 weeks than we probably saw in 8 years out there under Karimov. Of course, he inherited a problem immediately. There was Kyrgyz troops in Ungartu in Kyrgyzstan, and at the time that Karimov died, he moved fairly quickly to defuse this. I was surprised, pleasantly so, that he did. He was confirmed as acting president on September 8th. A lot of people would point out in violation of Uzbekistan's constitution, but in any case, he became leader of the country. On September 9th, he had already moved to free 4 Kyrgyz employees of the television relay station at Ungartu who were being held by Uzbek troops who had occupied the territory. He did not go to the CIS summit in Bishkek, pleading that he was just in power and needed to do some things at home, but he did send his foreign minister, Abdulaziz Kamilov, 1 day early to meet with Kyrgyz President Azimbek Atambayev. And they seemed to have fruitful discussions because they met on the 15th of September, and by the 18th of September, Uzbek troops had already left. And that was a surprise to a lot of us who figured that it would be hard for Mirziyoyev to back down so quickly on something like that. But so he'd moved pretty quickly to kind of ease tensions with Kyrgyzstan, which had not been good. And I'm going to start this by talking about the borders. And I have to describe, for those of you who are not familiar with the border situation around Uzbekistan, a little bit what it was like. For one thing, Uzbekistan in the 90s, certainly, and Raja would remember, had a history of moving the borders unilaterally whenever they could. Uzbek border guards and policemen were caught in practically every neighboring country, well inside the country, moving the fence posts. In Kazakhstan's case, it went several kilometers in before the Kazakh authorities had found out that they were redoing the fence to the advantage of Uzbekistan. And of course, unfortunately, we've had a lot of shootings on every border that Uzbekistan has. The Kyrgyz border is probably the most problematic, where every year several people get shot. Usually a couple of people die, but this is happening along the Kazakh border with Uzbekistan, along the Tajik border with Uzbekistan, and even along the Turkmen border with Uzbekistan. And of course, Afghanistan goes without saying that the Uzbek troops will open fire on anyone who's trying to come across that river. But so about just 2 days after the situation was diffused in Ungartu in Kyrgyzstan, reports appeared in Uzbek media, and that's very important, that Uzbek media said that they'd already been holding border demarcation talks with Kyrgyzstan. These have been going on for a long time, but they had just been holding them, and they had reviewed 23 sections of the border, which was also very pleasant to hear because, as I said, these border talks have been underway for really 10, 15 years anyway and going just absolutely nowhere. So at the same time that they diffused tensions with Ungartu and Uzbek troops finally removed themselves from there, the announcement comes that they're discussing final demarcation of the border, or at least a review of the demarcation of the border with Kyrgyzstan. By October 18th, so this is just a little bit more, 10 days ago, there was reports in Kyrgyz media this time that said they'd actually continued these meetings and they had reviewed 55 of 58 disputed areas along their common border, which is an amazingly quick pace given what we've seen previously in Uzbek-Kyrgyz border demarcation talks. Now Kazakhstan, and I want to stick with the border theme for a minute here, same Kazakhstan. This September 26th, here comes another report in Uzbek media saying that they've been working with the Kazakh government to finally demarcate that border. And to give you an example of how long that one's been going on, the Kazakhs specifically noted that these talks had started in 2003, but had jumped ahead. The Uzbek delegation had been in Almaty from September 21st to September 25th, discussed the border. Enough progress was made that by mid-October, Kazakh officials described the border talks as reaching their conclusion soon. So, again, moving forward very fast. Now, the meetings that they've had too are also very significant. We know that, for instance, at the start of this month, a Kyrgyz delegation was invited to visit the Uzbek town of Andijan. It was headed by a deputy Kyrgyz prime minister, but it included officials from all the bordering regions, Osh, Batken, Jalalabad, who came to Andijan for what was billed as a friendship meeting between the Kyrgyz and Uzbek peoples. Such a meeting would have been impossible to even think of. The border there has been sealed since the Osh unrest in 2010, and no one's been going across that border. So they opened up the border, made a big deal out of bringing a Kyrgyz delegation in. I hear that that was just reciprocated yesterday, I believe, right? Uzbek delegation went to Osh, and they did the same kind of festivities and Uzbek-Kyrgyz friendship and marked all that. So again, more progress there, and certainly something we haven't seen in the last 15 years at least. And during this time, Uzbek officials and the Kyrgyz have also managed to at least reportedly resume railway traffic, which has been a big thorn in their sides. The Uzbeks typically stopped railway trains going into Kyrgyzstan. Supposedly, and this is from the Kyrgyz side, those trains have started running again regularly and are visiting Kyrgyzstan. Bringing valuable cargo, of course, too, that they need in Kyrgyzstan. Now, Tajikistan, Tajik-Uzbek relations were probably the worst of any bilateral relationship in Central Asia. As bad as Kyrgyzstan-Uzbek relations were, Roger was talking earlier about the personalized relationship with Karimov, and Karimov always had the feeling that Rahman owed him for Uzbek support during the Tajik civil war, so he was very condescending to Tajikistan. Rahman was present for Karimov's funeral. I was surprised. So someone unkindly mentioned, he probably was thinking we'd come not to praise him but to bury him. But he made it symbolically. It was obviously a big step for the Tajik president to come there. At the end of September, Mirziyoyev sends the foreign minister to make a surprise visit to Dushanbe, and they start discussing resumption of railway traffic between them, which was a big deal, and especially in light of the fact that Uzbekistan has just finished a railway line built specifically to avoid Tajik territory. And so they talked about resuming what they consider normal railway traffic between the two countries. Vital for Tajikistan, as you can imagine, isolated there in the southeast corner of Central Asia, linked really only to places like Russia and Kazakhstan by rail. And also a possible resumption of a flight between Dushanbe and Tashkent, and that is, you were talking about how long I've been there, that's so old that I remember when they canceled that in 1992. And all these years they haven't managed to renew that airline or that particular route. So they're working on it, and that seems to be making some progress. Mid-October, surprise visit from an Uzbek business delegation to Sog, the northern region of Tajikistan, where apparently it's another one of those big friendship parties, and everyone talking about one people, two languages, all these kind of things. But considering what the recent posturing was by both these sides, you'd have to consider this to be a major breakthrough on their part, that they are talking. Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev was not at Karimov's funeral, but I'm sure you know that he showed up a few days later. Again, very good symbolically. Shows that they're willing to deal with the new guy immediately. September 22nd, a Kazakh deputy prime minister shows up in Uzbekistan, Askar Mamin, and discusses improving relations and foreign ties, or bilateral trade with Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan reciprocates on October 8th by sending one of their deputy prime ministers, Ulugбек Rozikulov. He went and visited Kazakhstan, and Mirziyoyev and Nazarbayev actually we're used to the media out in this region. They had a phone call, and usually I don't pay much attention to these things. Interfax and even the local Central Asian news agencies always make a big deal out of that the leaders spoke by phone, which really, who cares? But in this case, it does make a difference that they were talking about the right things, about how to improve relationships. So, and this seems to be coming from both ways, but it's most important that it's coming from Uzbekistan, who was usually kind of aloof from this stuff. Turkmenistan wasn't left out either. Trade talks, whose Turkmen delegation comes to Tashkent September 26th to start discussing better ties. Their ties were not bad, so that was all right. After Niyazov died, they got much better under the new guy, Verdi Mukhomedov, but it's still symbolic that Uzbekistan wanted to engage with everyone and not just former, not enemies exactly, but certainly not friends. And Afghanistan wasn't let out either. I mean, they weren't off the script. Ghani, the Afghan president, was at Karimov's funeral also. And on October 11th, Mirziyoyev, in one of his speeches, mentioned that representatives of Uzbekistan's foreign ministry would be going to Kabul very, very soon to discuss improving ties with that country. And on the sidelines of the Organization of Islamic Conference Summit, which was held in Tashkent just a couple of weeks ago, Kamilov, Foreign Minister Kamilov, signed an extradition agreement with the Afghan Foreign Minister, Sahaddin Rabbani, which, of course, this works to Uzbekistan's personal interest because there's a lot of what they would consider to be criminals in Afghanistan who they would like to have handed over to them, but it's still a sign that they're pressing forward with relations on every single front, which is something that we never saw in Uzbekistan before. They had a couple, good with Turkmenistan, fair with Kazakhstan, and bad relations in the east, and ignoring Afghanistan to the greatest extent possible. I've been dealing with the regional partners, but I would be remiss if I did not mention Russia, which everyone seems to think is going to have some kind of inside track, and there's going to be some huge rapprochement between Tashkent and Moscow. I think Mirziyoyev made it fairly clear at the start that he wasn't interested in any military alliances, meaning no CSTO. He also made it clear he wasn't interested in falling into the Eurasian Economic Union, so that wasn't going to happen. But for what it's worth, there already are some signs that at least one aspect of Russian-Uzbek relations are getting better, and that would be in the energy sector, where the head of Uzbek Nefti Gas, the state oil and gas company, went to Moscow September 13th to meet with Alexei Miller. He did manage to secure a quite slight boost in the amount of natural gas that Uzbekistan would be selling to Russia. And then, as part of his campaign tour, Mirziyoyev was touring the Nawai and Bukhara Wilayati, or the regions, and by chance he managed to run into Lukoil head Vagit Alekpirov at the Kandim gas processing plant so that they could talk about improving ties and maybe getting a little more Russian investment too. So we're moving forward real fast. Now I can't emphasize enough that at this point, except for a couple of very minor agreements, we're just talking. I haven't seen any deals signed or anything like that, but at least they're talking. That's a good sign, and it shows that there is some progress. But again, since there is no hard and fast contracts on any of this stuff or no agreements signed, this could all fall apart pretty much any time. And with elections looming just a little bit more than a month from now, anything talked about now might mean nothing in 2 or 3 months as far as the neighbors. But it's good because it'll help Uzbekistan economically as potentially a transit country. But it would be nice to see something that looked like unity in Central Asia, because they've kind of always been easy to pick away at from bigger powers because there is no unity in the region. So you deal with one country, but never with rarely with a grouping of countries out there. Okay, now we'll move to the harder at the core part, which is domestic policy. As much as hopeful as the moves in regional foreign policy have been, the news from inside Uzbekistan leaves little room for any kind of optimism at all. And in fact, I doubt that I'm pretty sure things will probably get a lot worse. Let's just run down some of this stuff real quick, and I know Dilram will get into some of this too. No change in the cotton campaign still went on. No sign that there would be any change in the cotton campaign. We know that rights activists who have been trying to document the forced labor in the cotton fields of Uzbekistan continue to be harassed, Yelena Relayeva being one of them, brought in, slapped around a little bit, along with another rights campaigner and a photographer. So no change there. Presidential elections coming up. We know that they're a joke to begin with, but 2 of the 3 opponents of Mirziyoyev in the election are people who ran against Karimov just a little more than a year and a half ago or something like that, and they got wiped out. But they're back again. So we already see that as far as elections are concerned in the electoral process in Uzbekistan, no change whatsoever. Worse, Mirziyoyev has a reputation as being something of a tough customer, I'll say. I could say a lot worse. But he's already ordered security forces to conduct raids on apartments in Tashkent and in places in the Fergana Valley. Masked men coming into people's house at 2, 3 in the morning with machine guns, sometimes taking people away, certainly searching the apartment thoroughly. And the people that they're looking for are relatives of opposition figures who have fled the country, or people who have been convicted of crimes related to religious extremism. Some of them are still in jail, and it's their relatives whose houses are being raided. But the message is very clear. that they're not going to tolerate any kind of dissent or criticism of the government. And you can look at this as, unfortunately, a preemptive strike on the part of the Uzbek government to intimidate and frighten the local population into obedience with the understanding that we're about to have a new leader. And then no one should be deluded that things are going to change and there's going to be some space for actually some kind of freedom of expression or opposition, alternative political parties, those kind of things. And then of course we have the return of a lot of odious figures to the Uzbek scene. Abdullah Aripov, who was run out because he was linked to Gulnara Karimova. He was the head of information and telecommunications in Uzbekistan. He was also a deputy prime minister. He was forced out of that office, I believe, 2012. Because of the brewing scandal with Gulnara Karimova, but he's been apparently fully rehabilitated and has retaken his position, exactly the position that he had before he was chased from the government. He is back deputy prime minister, head of information systems and telecommunications in Uzbekistan. Perhaps worse is Gafur Rahimov, who is on the U.S. Treasury Department list of people that they would like to see taken into custody. He was the head of the boxing federation in Uzbekistan, and I think you have to be a gangster to be the head of the boxing federation in any of these places, right? But he's also a known drug baron, or at least there's strong suspicions. He fled the country. He's been living in Dubai, I think, for the last few years, but he had to actually leave the country. His name suddenly disappeared from the Interpol wanted list. And I got September 14th as a date, so that's, 6 days after Mirziyoyev is the head of the country, effectively, and now everyone assumes, and our Uzbek service also, that it was removed at the request of the Uzbek government, and they anticipate that he will return sometime soon to Uzbekistan. The head of GM Uzbekistan, who was caught with his hand in the cookie jar as much as he could possibly be. Karimov went to Moscow, somehow or another the topic of Uzbek exports of automobiles from the GM Uzbekistan to Russia came up, and the Russians informed them that none of these cars were getting through. It turned out they were being parked in a big lot in Kazakhstan until people forgot about them, and then they were being driven back across the border and sold off at pure profit. And they sacked the head of GM Uzbekistan, whose name was Tahir Jan Jalilov, and he was in custody until just about a couple weeks ago, when suddenly he was freed from custody and placed under house arrest. Obviously at the order of the new government. So there's this criminal element that's coming in. Okay, good. 2 minutes, and that's what this is. Because I have a grand finale, which I already gave up to the other people earlier. The one thing that disturbs me most about Mirziyoyev, and we know he's going around the country and he's moving people around because he wants to consolidate his power base. He wants his guys in the region and in the big towns and cities and stuff like that. But what's really disturbing here is on September 16th, 8 days as head of government. 8 days as head of government. He goes to Jizak district, where he used to be the Akim, and sacks a bunch of officials there. He'd already sacked some in Samarkand, which is another region where he used to be the head. And then on September 18th, he goes to the Mirza Ulugh Beg district of Tashkent, which is where he started out his political career way back in the 1990s, and sacks a bunch of officials there. Those were the first places he went to after he was the interim president of Uzbekistan. And the first thing he did was get rid of people in these positions there. And I've heard the argument that he was familiar with those places, and so maybe he knew what the problems were, or he felt more comfortable starting there. He could have started with anywhere, and for all the world it looks like vendetta more than anything else, and this is how he started his presidency. He was named president on September 8th. By September 18th, he had visited all 3 of the places where he was in charge and sacked people and put other people in their place. So I think we have a tone for what we're looking forward to here for as long as he is president, which is basically, if you cross me, or if you ever have crossed me, I will find you and deal with you in an unpleasant manner. So.